Welcome to number 27, is this, of Derech Hashem, The Way of God by Rabbi Mordechai Goodman. We got to section 1, chapter 5, and we're about to start point 2. What are we on about today? Well, first of all, we're going to discuss the fact that we don't know anything about the spiritual world except for that which has been revealed to us through our tradition. We can't make any inferences about what happens spiritually because we don't have the vocabulary or the understanding. We're physical creatures mainly. The next thing we're going to talk about is how far evil goes up in the system. Then we're going to talk about how spirituality and physicality, according to Jewish thought, are completely intertwined. There's no separation really, and we'll discuss that. And then we will choose about how man interfaces with the system, affects the system, and the system responds to him. Okay, that's the plan. Any questions or comments, don't forget, there's an anonymous Google Docs form below the line you can read or fill in, or you could leave comments. Be in touch, got no problem with that. Let's jump straight into it on this book over here. We're page 77. We'll point, as I say, section 1, chapter 5.2. We're well aware of physical things and their natural properties, and laws are well known, specific gravities and densities of things, etc. Spiritual concepts, on the other hand, are outside of our realm of experience, and therefore they cannot be adequately described. It's not fair to ask us to describe purely spiritual concepts. One is, there's nothing purely spiritual we're asked to ever interface with. The Torah of Judaism, the Old Testament, the Bible, never asks us to do anything directly spiritual. In fact, the only things which are directly spiritual, which are mentioned in the Torah, such as conversing with the dead or summoning spirits like that, are always forbidden. They're always prescribed. So God will tell you about it and then say, don't do that. Don't do that. So whenever it's directly involved in spirituality, we never do it. Things that we do that have spiritual edges, I guess, would be korbanos, which we don't do anymore, offerings in the temple. Please God, they'll be reinstated. But generally we're listening to like the sound of a ram's horn being blown, or the crunching of matzah at a particular time, like flatbreads, or making kiddush over cups of wine, or putting on tefillin, or davening, praying, learning. These things are all physical in practicality, but their essence attaches into the spiritual, as we'll discuss. When we speak of spiritual entities and phenomena, we must therefore rely completely on the traditions handed down to us. I can't overemphasize how important that statement is. You cannot overemphasize this. Never jump to any conclusions about spirituality, and if someone turns around to you and says this is something spiritual, they have to have a source. They have to have a referenced source, a primary source, someone within the Torah to say this. You don't trust an individual unless an individual says this is a spiritual concept. There's a lot of books on Jewish spirituality available on Amazon and things like that, yeah? You might be interested in Jewish mysticism or Jewish spirituality. Let me tell you now, unless it's all sourced, it's not to be believed or trusted or acted upon. There's no way you can say it's kosher and it's fine for you to work with unless it's got a Torah source. And that's because we can't infer, extrapolate, guess what's spiritual. As it says, we have to rely completely on the traditions handed down to us in that respect. Now, that's not true in the Gemara, where we talk about monetary payments and lendings and things like that, where we can make inferences based upon the text as to what will be legal or not. This is about purely spiritual concepts. One of these fundamental spiritual concepts is that we have received a tradition is that everything in the physical world has a counterpart in the transcendental forces. Now, this is an extremely important idea. This is the idea of this picture over here. We've got the four-world structure that we've discussed, the programming, the CD, as it were, the actual file, the MP3 file that makes the sound out the music system is there. And that's where the coding happens. That coding is then transduced by the electrical system, which would be the malachim, the angelic realm. And then that influences space, specifically the zodiac, the Mazolas, the constellations, and that influences things going on planet Earth. Why do it like this? Just, if you want to make it happen, make it happen. The answer is this whole thing was designed to distance God from man so that man could feel as if his decisions are as important as God's. Remember the whole thing with perspective? Like if you're something very, very big is very, very far away, it looks the same size as something small in front of you. So too, your desire to eat a pork sandwich must be as great as God's desire to create the universe. Otherwise, you're not truly free-willed. God had to pull back, utilizing the system to give this guy, John, down there, the ability to be able to make a choice. Now, what's going on with spirituality? These two zones are spiritual, this is physical. This is the only place you'll find physicality, and in here you'll find spirituality. Beyond there, it isn't even spiritual anymore. It's beyond spiritual is quite a limited thing, actually. It's as limited as physical. Spiritual is not an infinite concept. It's bound by limitations. It has structure or some kind of corporality in some way. Even if it's not bound by physical concepts, it has structure spiritually. Otherwise, it can't be defined. So, spirituality is here, physicality is here. Here's the deal. If something physical is happening down here, it can only be an outcome of what's going on up there, which means they're intimately connected. The analogy that I like to give is imagine an anchor of a boat, and you're on the boat and you chuck the anchor overboard, and the anchor goes down below the sea, and the actual anchor blades, whatever you would call them, those bits that actually hit the seabed, they get into the seabed. And then you've got the links in the chain going all the way up the ocean until some pop out and actually are attached to your boat. Now, if you're down at the anchor and you look at it, you'd think, well, there's no boat here. It's ridiculous. I'm just looking at anchor. If you're a crab, you'll just see the anchor as an obstacle you have to overcome. But the truth is that anchor is absolutely connected to something which is in a different domain. It's in a domain outside the water. So if you were to pull on that chain, you'll be pulling on elements of that chain all the way up to something which is outside of your realm entirely, a realm you can't survive in. That's why whenever we move something physical, we're automatically interfacing with something spiritual as well. So the concept of gravity, the concept of mass, density, air, everything is all encoded in the kaichas. It's all in the primordial forces. So when you move something through space or time, it has to be touching that which is encoding as well. If I shake the chain on the end of the anchor, I'm shaking the boat to a certain extent, aren't I? I don't know how many atoms of the boat is moving. But the boat is moving. It depends on how small or big the boat is. Like if it's a big ocean liner, not perceptibly, but if it's a small rowing boat, the guy on the boat will feel someone shaking my anchor, right? What's going on? So you know that when you're pulling that anchor, something in a different realm, in a spiritual realm, is being manipulated as well. That's why we don't ever interface with spirituality directly, because you don't need to. It isn't as if there's this world and then there's another world and never the twain shall meet and they're not interconnected and somehow you've got to find your way into that world, which is more kind of like a Buddhist approach or a Jain approach. Jaine, right? The Jains, right? So they hold that the only way to free yourself of the constant turmoil of this world is to let go of this world entirely, to enter into another world. Why? Because they feel if it's better there. They're not trying to serve God or get close to anything. They just want something better than what they got now. So the way they have to do that is to completely loose themselves from all physicality and then get into this other realm. We say no. That other realm is as limited as this realm. It's manifesting differently. It's manifesting spiritually. But that spiritual manifestation was only created from the outset to manifest as something physical, such as this bell. So there has to be a spiritual concept to say stainless steel, dome, resonance. The fact it has a resonance, the idea of gravity, mass, density, weight, volume, all those things have to be encoded in the email code, as it were, before the picture comes out displayed on your screen. The only reason I invented the code was to display the email. The only reason I invented the spirituality was to display the physicality. So there's no point directly trying to hook into spirituality if when I move physicality, I'm automatically shaking the boat at the end of the anchor anyway. That's a very Jewish concept. Whether you accept or believe this, do you understand the idea? Do you understand what Judaism is saying about it? As long as you get that, then you've got the idea of what this material is conveying, right? This is what the Torah teaches. Now, every entity and process in the physical world, look at the words, is linked to these forces, following a system decreed by God's wisdom. These primordial forces, the koichas, literally forces in Hebrew, are therefore the roots of all physical things. And everything in the physical world is a branch result of these things. If you could see them, they would look more like letter code. That's what Kabbalists teach. It's like almost like a letter code. I think today in our modern life, where we realize that so much of our life is actually governed by computing, that we realize much of what we're actually interfacing with somehow, somewhere, is just a letter code somewhere. It's a self-executing code that's running. That's the spirituality that he created. It's kind of like the computer program behind the physicality. Why would he do it in those layers? To make a GUI, a graphical user interface, which you can interface with comfortably and think that you're in control of. That he isn't totally in control of it, or you're in control of it, kind of thing. That gives you this power of bechira, of free will, to say, well, then I can manipulate this program as I want. The physical and the spiritual are thus bound together like links in a chain. Interestingly, if you think about nervous impulses, our bodies work exactly the same. Notice when I had a muscle and neurology, she was a muscle nerve specialist called Janet Hudson. Maybe look her up at the University of Westminster. And she wasn't a religious lady at all, but she said when God finds a design, he keeps reusing it throughout nature. And that's a very deep idea. If you have a look here at a spinal column, so you can see there's the spinal column, there's the cerebellum, it's medulla oblongata, the pons is over here. We've got the vertebrae. When you think that you want a cup of tea, somehow, some way, a neurological impulse has to come down the spine and then turn left or right down whichever arm you want to direct it to. And then that neuromuscular junction, which is at the end of that nerve has to touch musculature. Look at this. This is a picture that's taken by a scanning electron microscope that's 1,650 times bigger than normal. And what we've got is what's called an end plate, which is the end of a nerve, which is touching a muscle fibre. Now that muscle fibre then receives the signal from the nerve and it will contract. You can even see clearly here the kind of lines of the myosin and actin filaments inside the muscle. Very difficult to see maybe on this camera, but it is actually visible on this scanning electron micrograph here. And what they do is they kind of like start moving. And what do the muscles do? The muscles via the tendons and the ligaments, or the tendons really, are attached to the bones. And completely inanimate object, stone, bone, which is the core of our physical being, moves. So the muscles hold the skeleton up, and it's the nerves that tell the muscles what to do. But what tells the nerves what to do? Thought, will. That's exactly this system. If you have a look on the side of this system, I've got mind, thought, speech, and action. That's how the Kabbalists teach it. Over here is the will to have a cup of tea, for whatever that is, for whatever the reason is that you want a cup of tea. That then has to go into the brain and down the nervous system to innervate the correct muscles. Now, the way that it gets down there is through electrical impulses. The Malachim are called electrical. When Ben Yehuda invented Ivrit, modern Hebrew, about 60 years ago, there was no word for electricity. So he stole the word for the name of an angel, which looks like a white flashing bolt of light. Ezekiel, in the first parak of Ezekiel, the first chapter of Ezekiel, Chashmal is a brand of angel, a breed, a species of angel, which appeared to him as white flashing light. He understood the white flashing light is a bit like electricity, so he called electricity Chashmal. But Chashmal is actually, that's like calling it cherub. You know, we need to pay the cherub bill. It's bonkers. The Chashmal is literally, the electrical forces running up and down the wires that are organised by the koichas. They're like the train tracks, these are the train carriages. What do? They interface with the musculature of the body, which then innovates something physical, the bone, right at the bottom. So you've got thought, will, which has to go down the neural system electrically to affect things in the physical world. That's how you make yourself a cup of tea. Everything you do is exactly the same. That's why we can learn about God by looking into the human body. Seeing how the systems work teaches us about nature as a whole. Because as Janet Hudson said, once God finds something he likes, as it were, not that he finds it, but you know what I mean, he keeps using that system. He mirrors that system. That's why the prophet says, when you make a bracha, Asher it's after going to the toilet. There's an idea in Judaism that after we use the bathroom, we should make a blessing to thank God for respiration and the ability to be able to have a healthy, functioning body. If you look carefully into the functions of the body, you will find divine systems at play. There's lots of things in the body that you wouldn't design. It's certainly not a human design. We also know from tradition that every physical entity and process is under the charge of some type of angel, because how's the kayach, the force, the brain, the nerves, going to talk to any other part of the body if it isn't through the neural system? The angels are actually the neural impulses going up and down the system the whole time. These angels have the responsibility of maintaining the natural order as well as bringing about changes according to God's decree. So they transduce concepts from the forces down into the physical world. That's the job of an angel. That's its job. A lot of stuff there. We discussed a lot of stuff there. Let's do maybe one more idea. The existence and state of being of the physical universe thus emanate from these highest forces. Everything is encoded on the CD. If you put a CD in a music player and you hear trumpets out the speakers, I guarantee to you somewhere on that CD there's got to be pits, little dots that are carved into that CD that mean trumpet. Otherwise they wouldn't come out the speaker. If something's happening in the physical world, it has to be an outcome of something that's been written for it to happen in the code. Whatever exists in the physical world is a result of something that takes place in the forces, as we've just said. This is true of both what existed in the beginning and what transpires with the passage of time. Why is he saying that? The concept of time itself has to be written into the code. Time is not something which we create. It's Boroshis. It's the first word of the Torah, Bereshis. In the beginning he created, is Genesis. Boroshis means literally he created six, says the Tikkun Izar. What does that mean? He created the 6 dimensions of up, down, left and right, forward, backwards, and the fact that it's moving through time. The seventh, number 7, is the core of that cube, which is why 7 is such an important number in Judaism, because it's the actual essence of why you made the box. So the first thing he did was he created the concept of time dimension, number 6. 7 is what you put into that. It's what's important. And 8 is beyond that, which is why 8 is a very mystical number in Judaism. Okay, these forces were the first things that were created, big piece of data that was released there. The first thing that God made when he made the universe were the forces. That makes sense. He started with the programming code. Make the code before you make the actual final, vending machine or whatever it is. You've got to write the code. It's interesting, when you develop neurologically, embryologically in the womb, the cells that come together start forming in to make an embryonic disc. And the cells that migrate across the skin of the baby, the fetus, the zygote, just beyond the zygote, and a fetus at that stage, these cells actually start wrapping in to make something called a notochord. And that notochord becomes the spinal cord in the brain. The brain and the spinal cord are the first things to be developed embryologically. Exactly the same as how God created the universe. First, make the neural structure. Make the forces. Make the actual wires that the electricity is going to go up and down on. So too, the core of our body, as it were, the core of our consciousness, is our brain and spinal column. That's the most important element of our mind, our being, who we are, and our ability through the spine to be able to conduit our will down into our body and get things done. It's not the muscles that make the decisions what we do. It's us, it's our will, which is an outcome of a fully functioning brain. A fully functioning brain makes something called a nefesh bahamis, an animalistic soul. It's a highly conscious, highly ethereal organism, but it is physical. It is physical. There are spiritual concepts of the soul, but that is a physical concept of the soul. And that's the outcome of a fully functioning neural system. So these forces were the first things that were created, and they were arranged in various systems and placed in different domains, just like we have different domains in the brain that do different jobs. Everything that came about later was a result of that. So God said, right, now that I made that, that's going to manifest, following rules willed by God, linking the forces to the physical world, like the chains and the anchor. Everything that happens in the past or present thus has its origin in the process taking place between these forces. The existence, state, and pattern of every other quality that exists among these forces are a result of what is relevant to them by virtue of their essential nature. If I need to create a force to deal with gravity, so I'll write that in, and that force will have to manifest that gravity down through the system. The existence, state, and arrangement of other phenomena involving physical things in turn depend upon what is transmitted and reflected to them by these forces. Obviously, if something physical exists, it's an outcome of the programming code, following the essential nature of these physical entities, whatever it is. If you need a zebra, somehow, somewhere, you're going to get it like a horse-like force somewhere, and then a stripy force, and those two have got to merge to make like a stripy kind of horse. That's, if you want zebra, that's the way it's going to happen. How they adapt, how they live, how they decide to breed, where they decide to migrate to, is all written in the forces associated with zebra. It has to be, otherwise they wouldn't be there. It's not a completely separate thing, which is you can't say just genetics, atmosphere, environment, time, space, and dimension are separate from those things which govern them. There are governing forces that put all these rules into place and make them all gel together. Those forces are pre-written, and those are spiritual in nature. We're going to learn next time why it is it's so important to know this. Because you've got to understand, from a Jewish perspective, not from other religions, but from a Jewish perspective, this is of massive import. If I take an object and I move it, if I hit someone over the head with it, which is wrong, or I utilize it to help someone get some service, which would be right, let's say, I'm actually interfacing with something which is at the end of a long chain which culminates in spirituality. So apart from utilizing the physical world correctly or incorrectly, I'm actually manifesting correct or incorrect spirituality as well, because I cannot divorce the physical from the spiritual. So if I utilize a physical object for good purpose, I am in line with the original spiritual line of good, which says that's the best way to utilize this object. If I take an object like a pencil and stab someone in the face with it, when I'm not saving my life, let's say, just gratuitously, then I am using that pencil terribly. That is not the best. You could write a word of help or new Torah ideas or words of, consolation or words of new law which will help people, or a new mathematical code which could help the world. You can invent the cure from a disease with it and then post that off. You could do wonderful things with a pencil. But if a terrible thing with a pencil means that the spiritual activities or systems that are behind what manifests everything physically are also being sullied. If I start pulling on the anchor badly and I misuse what the anchor's meant to do, the boat will go adrift. I.e., you can't separate out what you do physically to a spiritual effect. Every physical thing you do has an effect. This is learnt most piquantly by the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, in the temple on Yom Kippur, in the Jewish temple in the high holy days, would wear a special garment called the me'il. I don't know how to a tunic. Don't know how to best translate that. At the bottom of the me'il, at the bottom of this tunic, were little bells, golden bells, and everywhere the Kohen went, the bells would tinkle. Now, what that told us was a very, very important thing. Obviously, the really important things he was doing during the day, the service in the temple was very, very important. But if he dropped his keys or his bubble gum or something, I don't know, something like that, and he wanted to pick it up, that would also tinkle the bell. Rabbi Mordechai Goodman in the Pirkei Torah says, this teaches us that every human activity, no matter how insignificant, always has some effect or ramification upstairs in the system. That's why the bell tinkling was so important to see. We'll continue on this next time as to how humans interface with that, and I look forward to seeing you then. I think for number 28 that'll be. Well done for making it this far. Any questions, you know where I am. Look forward to seeing you next time.